Hey guys, I'm Basil. This is the POCO X3 Pro. This is the X3 NFC. Two really similar phones. They feel identical. I literally have to look at the back of each one before I can figure out which is which, but they are different, I assure you. This video does have a reason to exist, not least of all the fact that the X3 Pro has more power, a Snapdragon 870 versus a 735. It's also got different cameras, more resolution on the NFC, interestingly, the older one. It's got a 64 megapixel Sony IMX682 versus a 582, which is 48 megapixels. Also, the 13 megapixel ultrawide outpixels the 8 megapixel ultrawide on the POCO X3 Pro. But I still prefer the X3 Pro camera. What's going on? That's what this video is about, like I said. Before I carry on talking about phones though, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. I'll be making more videos, I hope, and you'll be watching them, I hope. Anyway, back to these phones. So you can see, design-wise, really similar. 215 grams each, so in my hand, can't tell the difference, but they do have some good things in common. Down at the base, you've got 3.5mm headphone jacks, USB-Cs, they both support nice nippy 33-watt charging. You've also got stereo speakers, so they make for enjoyable audio experiences. Right-hand side fingerprint scanner / power button combinations, both very responsive, and you also got volume rockers as well. Up at the top, pew pew pew, infrared blasters, while to the left-hand side you have SIM card trays. Now, I really don't mind that these are big phones. I'm big, I'm 6'4", I have huge hands, so these phones don't feel too unwieldy for me. The phones have big screens, 6.67 inches, so around the same size as the Oppo Find X3 Pro, and maybe some people just can't take all that plastic, but considering how much they are, I'm kind of all right with all that plastic. There are a couple of things I don't love about the design. POCO, big POCO logos on the back. It's much better on the Pro than it is on the X3 NFC, maybe because of the phantom black version I have, just looking less, but yeah, I don't like that much. And the camera shape, it's kind of like a cropped circle. So what you end up with is a lot of dust in the flat parts of the camera surround. So they're the two things I don't like. Everything else, including the heft, I don't mind that much because it makes them feel really nice and solid. Right, what about those screens? When I started using the X3 Pro, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm coming from the Mate X2 and other OLED devices or AMOLED devices. I'm really going to be missing my AMOLEDs. And that only ever happens when I'm watching really letterboxed content with a lot of black. 120Hz screen makes a UI float. It glides beautifully. And across both, they're identical screens. 1800 by 2400, like I said, 120Hz, 415 its average brightness. Really decent. Not the brightest, not the best, but very competent for the price. Looks very good. Auto brightness as well is pretty aggressive, I have to say. I was outdoors and I couldn't quite see the screen because auto brightness was quite aggressive, good for battery saving. And that said, I flicked it off, whacked the brightness up, I could see the screen. And so I'll come on to the battery in a bit, but that really is a high point of the X3 NFC and Pro and explains why they're so hefty. 5160 milliamp battery, so really big cell in each. Now what I do love about the phone is what you get in the specs department, but what I don't necessarily love is the fact that Xiaomi's interface is loaded up with adverts. That's always going to be the way for POCO phones, and it's the same across both of these. I don't know if it's always going to be the way, but it's always been the way. When you're loading an application or installing an application, browsing some themes, you may get served third-party adverts every now and then, and you have to be okay with it. And again, it's kind of like subsidized Kindles. You probably are if you're picking up a POCO phone. Pick up a POCO, that's like a pick up a penguin. Anyway, it's not that big a deal for me. I don't mind. If I had that with the Mi 11, I would mind because I'm paying more money and I'm not getting as great value. But with POCO phones, you do tend to get fantastic value. Now, as far as the cameras go, the IMX582 performs really nicely on the X3 Pro, even though it's lower resolution. Xiaomi and POCO's new image processing software means that it brightens up dark environments with slightly longer artificial exposures and compositing is just that bit smarter. So in low light situations, it's better able to deal than the X3 NFC. In addition, that can also be said of the ultra wide, and the ultra wide just has a nicer kind of like finish. The photos aren't necessarily as croppable because it has less pixels going for it, but they are at least as shareable, if not more so, by just the nature of them looking pretty. With the photos generally across both, they are strong, and image stabilization in video is also strong considering there's no OIS in either. Both going up to 4K, but I will say I just prefer the look of photos on the X3 Pro despite the on paper inferior specs of the camera. Then there's a battery. I got 2 days out of each. The X3 NFC lasts longer, the X3 Pro lasts a little bit less, unsurprising with the Snapdragon 870 power, but that Snapdragon 870 power means you can play Genshin Impact and lots of other games at really high graphic settings without sweating. Whereas the POCO X3 NFC with its Snapdragon 735 just can't stack up comparatively. So if you're big on gaming, then it's the X3 Pro all the way, but if you don't mind not whacking up the graphic settings and you just want a really decent across the board experience, the X3 NFC may be the better choice, and it trumps the X3 Pro in terms of battery. Hopefully you enjoyed this comparison, overviewing all the most important bits in terms of storage and all of that stuff. They're basically the same, 128. You can get a 256GB version of the X3 Pro, but generally speaking, both very, very good phones. If you like this video, click that thumbs up button. If you like the channel, subscribe like I said earlier, and hopefully you will be watching a lot more of me. Have a great day. Bye.